a woman takes power? What happens when she won't back down? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens? What happens? What happens when a woman takes
Boom.
power?
We are recording. Thank you, Anne. I didn't even have to plug in any numbers. Okay, we are recording.
Awesome.
Jasmine, all yours.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So like I said, I'm going to talk about my own career path, how I got where I am and what inspired me. So I want to go back to my roots first. And I want you to just take a moment to either close your eyes or just go with me here. You see this picture of the bayou. I'm from Monroe, Louisiana, which is 4 hours northeast of New Orleans, Louisiana. Yes, there are other cities in Louisiana. I know that's quite foreign to some people. And for me, up until 2005, there was nothing quite like the smell of the bayou. I would go and I would sit on the levee and I would think of life. I would think of, why did this boyfriend just break up with me? I would think about what new techniques I need to learn for soccer. I would have family barbecues and gatherings. And this for me was grounding. This was life. Everything about me was rooted in the bayou. That was until 2005. And in 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit. And Hurricane Katrina brought about disaster and devastation. This was the moment for me that something was awoken in my soul. Like I said, I was in Monroe, Louisiana. We were 4 hours north. We were marked as the first safe zone. And this was only because State Farm Insurance had their headquarters there in Monroe, Louisiana. So there was a huge campus which allowed for many families to be able to gain shelter. But it really wasn't safe. There were tornadoes, trees were knocked down, power was lost. For me, it was us trying to get in touch with my uncle for over 24 hours, and he was stuck on the highway because there were no proper evacuation routes. Many people did not realize that New Orleans, proper New Orleans itself, has a lot of poverty. This really wasn't seen until newscasters were showing people on top of their roofs, people in the streets. People were wondering, why are so many people running into the Superdome? Well, that's because 70% of the population in proper New Orleans does not own a vehicle. And so when we talk about not only not having proper evacuation routes, we didn't even have in place public transportation that could take people out of New Orleans to somewhere safe. And I remember it was a couple weeks later, and 2 kids walked into my calculus classroom with Mr. Rogers. And I remember just looking at them, and you just saw pain and sorrow on their faces. They had lost absolutely everything. I mean, for them, it was literally they had the clothes on their back and it wasn't looking back. It wasn't just these 2 kids, but those are the 2 that I immediately remember. We had a huge influx of kids into our school, into the community, and the community rallied around them, families, giving them any and everything. When people lost their homes to Hurricane Katrina, it wasn't just you losing your dwelling, where you lay your head at night. It was your children losing their friends and their classmates. It was them losing their school and the local playground. It was parents and individuals losing their jobs, losing their businesses. I mean, some businesses have been owned and passed down generation to generation to generation, gone within seconds, within moments. And this was the moment that I witnessed climate migration. I didn't know that it was called climate migration. I didn't know that was a thing. I just knew everyone is losing everything, again, from their homes to their business to their grandmother's necklace that had been passed down generation to generation, to the family pictures that were hung in houses. And even though you went back and visited your house a month later, there was no way that it was going to be recovered because it was covered in mold. I know a lot of people who have never even been back to New Orleans because of this devastation, because of how it affected them mentally, because of how much loss actually occurred. People migrated temporarily and then permanently into FEMA trailers, into family homes. So a lot of multi-generational homes started to pop up. People moved to the Northeast, the Midwest, and a lot of people moved to Houston, Texas. And we saw in Houston, Texas, I'll fast forward a little bit to a few years ago when Hurricane Harvey occurred. Some of the same people, some of the same families who lost their homes in Hurricane Katrina lost their homes during Hurricane Harvey. This is called secondary displacement. And secondary displacement is where we are definitely going to have to accommodate for, not just in the United States, but around the world. Hurricane Katrina only exacerbated the existing stressors and inequities that were already within New Orleans area and the greater Gulf Coast area in Louisiana itself. And when we talk about the inequities and the stressors, I'm talking about these impacts from the racial perspective, the health perspective, migration, food insecurity, housing, sociocultural, environmental, economical, all of those impacts. And frontline communities, which include communities of color, low-income communities, coastal communities. Frontline communities also have vulnerable persons, which are women and children, disabled persons. All of those groups and set of individuals are, with each of those different impacts and risks, are not at an equal bar. You know, as women, which all of us are on this call, the moment we pop out of the womb, we are popping into a world that is unequal for us. Unfortunately, that is how it is, and that is how it's continued to be. You know, the fight just continues going on and on. So after Hurricane Katrina happened, I had always known I wanted to study biology and I wanted to be pre-med and be a doctor. That's all I said I wanted to be. I headed to the University of South Alabama and I was on a D1 women's soccer scholarship. So to me, my dreams were coming true. I had turned down top 20 schools because I wanted to have a life during college. Well, I found out very shortly that it didn't matter me going to a top 20 or a mid D1 school. I was not really going to have a life because I was playing college athletics. It was very important to me to continue to not only be good on the field, but be good in the classroom. I was raised by a dentist and an educator, so sciences and math were very heavy in my household, but biology was something I loved. I loved the outdoors from a very young age. I loved wanting to figure out what's the why and what's the solution to a problem. During my junior year of college, I ended up after practice one day having a major stroke and being rushed to the hospital. I exhibited all of the symptoms that you would think a 80, 90-year-old would have with a stroke. And I ended up needing to have heart surgery to close the hole in my heart, which is where the clot got through to my brain. After 9 months of rehab, I wasn't just walking and running again, but I was able to play my last year of college soccer. At this point, I knew that medical school was not for me. I didn't want to be in the medical field anymore. My life, or as I like to say, God threw me a pivot and I was like, okay, I'm going to go another direction. I wanted to stay in biology. So I convinced my parents and really leaned on the independent nature that I had always had and said, I need to go study abroad for a summer. So I went and I studied abroad in Belize, and it was a tropical biology course. And I was a super senior. I just needed a couple of courses to finish. And this was a way for me to complete one of those courses, but also for me to regain my independence, study something I love, and be in another country. I was in the rainforest, in the jungle, and I was on Southwater Key. A key is a very tiny, tiny island. It's spelled C-A-Y-E. And one early morning, I was free diving on a coral reef. So as you can see in this picture, that's basically what I did. I just dove down and I was looking at this gorgeous reef. And as I came back up, the sun was rising behind the coral reef. And in that moment, God spoke to me and said, "This is what you need to be doing." Now, I had never had God speak to me before. So I was like, this inanimate figure is speaking to me. What is going on here? But I need to listen to it. You know, this was my belief system. I'd always believed in God. He's telling me something. So I went back to my college advisor and I said, I need to study marine biology in graduate school and I want to go away. And I want to leave the country when I say I want to go away. She was like, okay. So I applied to several schools and I decided to go to the University of Essex in Colchester, Essex, England. My reasonings for going here is one, I had loved England since high school. I had gone there for our senior school trip. And I had told my parents, I'm going to be back in England one day, whether it's for school, for love, for family, for a job. And as always, they were just like, yeah, okay, Jasmine. And so when I got my acceptance letter, I was like, see, I told y'all I'm headed. And my second reasoning is because their tropical marine biology course was one of the top courses globally. And professors had specific niches that they were specialized in and recognized for and had won many awards for. My third reasoning was that I was going to be able to conduct research in Indonesia. Indonesia is one of the world's biodiversity hotspots. So I'm like, I get to double study abroad. Yes, that's definitely what I'm going to do. I would recommend to any and everyone, if you get a chance to study, work abroad, there's nothing like it. Do it while you're young, because when you have kids, when you have a family, it's harder. It's even harder to do international vacations. So do it while you're young. Meet people from all over the world. I have friends from countries I didn't even know existed. Mauritius, Seychelles, I didn't know those existed prior to going to Essex. And so to have people from all over the world, and we know that if we're going to be traveling there, we can pop into their home. They'll have us over for a family meal. That is absolutely amazing. Not to mention, it looks great on your resume. My research in Indonesia, this was with the Bajo people. And the Bajo people are also known as water nomads. And they had lived on their boats for decades. This was their way of life. This was their culture. But as time and time has told us, there seems to be this thing in the world and within humans that we want to take from one another and take each other's cultures. And the Indonesian government, along with Malaysia, had put into place some very constraining measures, I guess would be the most political way for me to put it. And they had to now live on land. So they could no longer live in their boats. They had to live on land, but they couldn't have the same citizenship rights as all Indonesians. And for me, being immersed in these people, one, I was seeing the disproportionate impacts of climate change on another community of color. Secondly, it was in the global context. I was now seeing some of the sociocultural impacts and risk of climate change. I was seeing where there was the government mistrust. So the Bajo people don't trust the government, yet will work with some of them, blowing up some of the coral reef and selling it, and or taking it to put underneath their homes because it signified wealth. At the same time, the Bajo people could tell you, so the generation of, I would say, people late 70s to 90s could tell me, when I was growing up, there were tons of fish in the sea. We saw so much life, and now there's no more fish in the sea, Jasmine. And then you go to little kids. I wish I had that picture. It's on my credit card, actually, and I've had it for years. These 7 to 9-year-old girls that I worked with, we taught each other Bajo and English interchangeably through drawing pictures, and I would say it in English, they would say it in Bajo, and they would tell me how they want to go away to school to learn about conservation and learn more about climate change and come back and create a sustainable environment for their people. And so you saw that the multiple generations were understanding that something is wrong, something is going on. You saw where there were women in their prime maternal health, women in their 30s and 40s who were having children, and they knew for a fact that if there was anything wrong during the pregnancy or labor and delivery, it was more than likely that them and the baby would die, because we were on Hoga Island. Hoga Island is so tiny and remote, you cannot find it on a map. If you Google Wakatobi region, Indonesia, then we are a dot within the Wakatobi region. And it would take a helicopter from a main island with a large hospital 24 hours to get to the island that we were on. And so here we are talking about maternal health. I know that some papers and articles have started to come out and talk about how maternal health is tied to climate change. This is due to several things. This could be due to you living in a polluted area, which stems from redlining. This could be due to you having worked in a plant. This could be due to you are predisposed to asthma from a very young age and never grow out of it. So there are several factors there. And this is another reason why we as women, no matter what your race or religion, etc., is, we have got to care about the climate crisis. We have got to care about climate change. We have to speak up on it because we're the ones who are the most vulnerable. 80% of the people displaced by climate change are women. 80%. So my research in Indonesia, for me, it amplified my voice and it made me realize that my gift was my voice. I have a knack for being able to speak to a variety of people and to get my message across, to also receive whatever they are telling me and be able to communicate that to another audience. This is what advocacy is about. Advocacy is about speaking up on behalf of those who no longer have a voice or who need an elevated voice. And so this is why I came to DC. And so I like to say that I've taken on Washington, DC like a boss. Some of my friends, my mentor, Grace Terpstra, or as I call her, G, she is a white woman in her 60s who ran Terpstra Associates lobbying firm that I interned for. She was the person that got me here to DC. And G and I have these jokes. She would always give me these newspaper clippings. She actually spoke at my celebration for me getting this new role, but she calls me the climate change Olivia Pope. And if you don't know who Olivia Pope is, she's from the show Scandal, but she is saying that because I get things done. I'm not afraid to stick my head out there. I'm not afraid to make a mistake and own up to it. I want us to get this done. I want us to continue to build the movement. I want us all to realize that it is our lives at stake. The Earth is going to be good, y'all. The Earth has survived 5 mass extinctions. We're currently in the 6th one, and it has reacted all different ways each time. 6th one, it's very slow. So we're not in panic mode of like, oh, it's about to, demolish at any moment. That's not how we are. There's these very small species that are disappearing and becoming extinct that we just don't talk about. And this is why we need to figure out how we are going to react to climate change. And I think that's really going to depend on our individual makeups. So yes, where we live, where we've grown up, what our race is, the amount of melanin in our skin, those are all going to be different factors. My graduate thesis was the shifts in the genetic composition of 3 DMS consuming cnidarians. I know that sounds absolutely crazy. It was on coral reefs and sponges, essentially. And what I did was I got this very, very hot lamp. I did this in a lab. It was very intense heat, shined it on them for a week. And I wanted to see their genetic makeup, their DNA, what was going to happen to them. One of the corals, it died. Another one, the DNA changed completely. And then another one, it changed. And approximately a week to 10 days, the DNA reverted back to its original DNA. So my point of doing this was showing that different species are going to react different ways to climatic changes, specifically increased heat. And so for me, being in DC, it has been a dream. It is the hub of policy and advocacy, as you all know. I've worked for a lobbying firm. I've worked on Capitol Hill with the US House of Representatives Science, Space, and Technology Committee. There were a couple years of some logistics management. I then transitioned to working with HIAS, and I did a pivot because administration had changed and I needed to make sure that I was continuously growing professionally, leveraging the skill set I already had. But the environment and the climate change field was the budgets were cut. That was not a top priority for the previous administration. So quite a few of us had to make different moves. I went to HIAS. HIAS is an international refugee rights protection agency. And I guess you'll get a sense of my personality, but on the interview with them, I told them I was being hired as a special assistant. And I said to them, I won't be in this job for long. I'll be promoted within 6 months. What happened 6 months later? I was promoted and I led their special projects, their initiatives. I traveled domestically and internationally. And for me, I was getting the itch again on climate migration. It was a full circle moment for me. This was where my roots and introduction to climate change had happened back in 2005. And here we were now to 2014, 15, somewhere around there. And I loved it, but the environmental climate change sector and the immigration refugee sector have worked on climate migration either siloed or not at all, because it's been, this is your issue. No, that's your issue. Not really realizing that it's such an intersectional issue, needing people from both sectors to work on it together. And so I knew that I needed to get directly back into the climate change sector. And this was after many conversations with people and saying that I would get more leeway in the environment and climate change sector. Prior to me getting this role at Our Climate, I had not heard of Our Climate. I had always heard of the big green organizations. I would identify this as a challenge for small and medium climate justice organizations. That notoriety is very, very hard, and it can be, the big greens can overtake them. The big greens are working with the small and medium climate justice organizations, by the way, but they are just not necessarily getting the notoriety and the recognition. This job landed in my lap, and that a friend sent me the job description and said, you need to apply for this. You would be great at it. And I applied. Interview process was over a month long, and July 1, 2020, I became Our Climate's first Black female executive director. This has been a dream role in the sense that I always knew I wanted to lead a climate change organization. I didn't know which one that was going to be, when that was going to be in my life. I just knew that that was one of my dream roles. And I have a couple things on this slide. So I wrote a USA Today article. This was September 2020, I believe that came out. And just last week on Thursday, I had no idea that this is what the article was going to be. I was contacted for a quote, and CNBC featured me in 6 Black climate change leaders you need to know. It is an absolute honor being featured alongside Dr. Robert Bullard, who is the father of the environmental justice movement. I will just say I was in complete shock, and it didn't really hit me till late Thursday night when I started just getting phone calls from family and friends. And another full circle moment for me. That hard work is paying off. And, I do this because of where I came from and the community I came from. And I do this because our lives depend on it. Every day I am making an impact. And there's nothing like that. There's nothing like knowing that I'm leaving my footprints on this earth each and every day, literally just because of what I am doing. And now I'm going to talk about Our Climate. So Our Climate is a climate change advocacy organization. It was founded in 2013 as Oregon Climate. And this was a statewide campaign in which young student activists, student leaders, and adult allies came together And this picture on the right is an example of some tiles. So those are mosaic tiles where people will paint them, and they will paint them to depict what does climate change mean to them? How is climate change affecting them, their families, their communities? So these student leaders and adult allies came together and outside of the Oregon State Capitol formed a 125-foot salmon mosaic. Now, why a salmon? It's because it's essential to the industry in Oregon. It is something that a lot of people love to eat, to fish. It's part of the culture. And so we were, and by we, I mean OC was recognized with this. And the Years of Living Dangerously project in National Geographic recognized OC in their series. And so in 2016, we started a national campaign called Put a Price on It. This was about carbon pricing. And this is essentially what Oregon Climate at the time had worked on for the past few years. But when that national campaign started, of course, it went across the nation. There were universities involved, other organizations, and it was a great campaign. We then started to move into other states, so run other state campaigns. And so over the past few years, we have been in Oregon, Washington, Nebraska, Florida, Massachusetts, New York. The Nebraska program ended in December 2020. So we are now just in Oregon, Washington, Florida, Massachusetts, and New York. In 2016, we gained our 501c3 status. We have gone on to do these mosaics in several of our states. So this picture on the left is the whale mosaic that was done in Massachusetts. We have just finished the manatee mosaic in Florida. So we always identify an animal that's associated with the state. And we always use art. It was artwork that started the movement. It is artwork that continues the movement. Artwork is something that we found not only is one, visually appealing, two, it allows people to have multiple interpretations. Three, it's widely received by elected officials. The combination of these young people who are knowledgeable around this subject matter and using artwork to depict their feelings, their statements, it's widely received by elected officials. Elected officials actually want to talk to young people. I show up as a lobbyist in meetings, and our student leaders show up as these vibrant, passionate kids who want to listen. They want to share. They want to sit down and have the quote unquote taboo conversation about climate change. They want to acknowledge where we've been, the inequities and the stressors that exist, but they want to get to the solutions. Our climate is now rooted in 3 policy principle areas. So the team was already working with our student leaders on refreshing our policy principle, which was just carbon pricing, in 2020 when I was being brought on. So we are now rooted in 3 areas: renewable energy targets, corporate polluter fees, and environmental justice legislation. I like to tell people that personally and even professionally through OC, that I look at everything through an EJ, environmental justice lens. So even though it is one of our policy principles, we look at renewable energy targets and corporate polluter fees with the EJ lens. We want to make sure that there are investments going directly back into the frontline communities that have been the most impacted. We want to make sure that jobs are being created for those who, as we are trying to do a just transition and get people out of working from chemical plants, making sure that jobs are available, that there is paid training for them. We want to make sure that there's community buy-in and that education is in place. It is not that, and as a Black woman, I can say this, it is not that Black, Brown, Indigenous people of color do not care about climate change. We have a lot of things that we're worrying about. I know that as I walk out of my door, or my partner, he walks out of the door, I hold my breath every time, if I'm being honest, because as we know, there's police brutality, there's racism. It has only increased over the past few years, and people came out of the woodworks when there was this platform with the former occupant of the White House. And I need people to know that our communities very much do care about it. But how I talk about it with my community is showing all of the intersections, showing how Black women are more exposed to premature births, miscarriages, just because we have lived in polluted areas, which stems back to redlining, which stems back to the New Deal, that everything is interconnected. I want to take a moment. Sorry, that was a high. I'm going to take us back down a moment. State campaign wins. Our student leaders have been quite successful in passing state level policies. In New York, we passed the CLCPA, New York's Climate Leadership Community Protection Act. This is also known as the most monumental climate legislation in the nation. We passed this with our coalition that we're part of in New York, which is called New York Renews. They are now on the second leg of this, which is the CCIA, the Climate Community Investment Act. I am also very proud to say that OC is now showing that not only have we been successful in passing state level policy, we are showing that the state level policy we've passed and helped advance is now being modeled on the federal level. So Congresswoman Yvette D. Clarke from New York introduced the Climate Justice Act, which is the model of New York CLCPA on the federal level. In Oregon, there's the Governor Kate Brown's executive order to reduce emissions. In the state of Washington, it's the Climate Pollution Limits Bill. And then in Massachusetts, most recently, the 2050 Roadmap to Climate Bill. I was brought on specifically to our climate, or what they liked about me is that I had the federal policy experience and the international experience, bringing us into this new phase, because we were all quite hopeful that climate legislation was going to happen on the federal level. And so we needed to move into this new phase of our life cycle. We are constantly working on developing our student leaders, or as I call them, our frontline climate warriors. More than 50% of them are from frontline communities. So more than 50% kids of color, a little less than that low income, and then just a few of them from coastal income communities. Our fellows so our leadership development program has 3 tiers. You have your field representatives. These are high school and college students who are just dipping their toes into the climate justice movement. You have fellows, and they go through a whole fellowship program. So they go through our core curriculum: climate justice, climate policy, advocacy, storytelling, coalition building, organizing, self-care as a form of protest. And then they also attend a external leadership development or professional development training. So we reimburse them up to $500 to be able to do this. So some of them have fully taken advantage of that and done several trainings. And then we are also very proud to say that we have had several of our fellows move up through the ranks within OC. So become full-time staff, become a board member. We are not just talking the talk, we are walking the walk of developing leaders. OC is the catalyst for young people becoming visionaries, activists, and leaders in their own communities. Something I wanted to create when I started was a place for young people and climate professionals to be able to talk. I listened to a lot of podcasts, a lot of climate podcasts, but I was not seeing where there was like a young person and a climate professional having a down-to-earth conversation. Now, I'm not talking about getting into the science, nitty-gritty, shifts in the genetic composition. No, we want this to be informal. We want to talk about what you would talk about at the dinner table with your family. And so we created Is It Hot Enough For You? This is a saying we say in the South. Is it hot enough for you? Because it's usually, like 100 degrees with 103-degree humidity. So it's always hot or spicy. We have had Andres Jimenez, who's the executive director of Green 2.0 and also a very dear friend. And Green 2.0 is an organization that is really uplifting BIPOC folks and raising awareness of how the environmental movement has looked very white male. So they do these annual report cards, and I believe it's the top 30 foundations that give to environmental organizations and also the big greens. asking them about, do you have DEIJ principles? Do you have a policy? Do you have a DEIJ committee? What are the demographics of your staff, your leadership, your board? And then what is the makeup of who you're serving? What you're doing? What does that look like? I have also had Dr. Greg Stone. So he's a chief ocean scientist, deep green metals. And really all of these people, either I have known personally, my staff know personally. Roshan is a fellow who does amazing work in Washington. Sharona Schneider is in Oregon. Not only is she a field advisor, who's the top tier of our leadership development program, so she's gone all the way through it and now acts as a mentor to our young student leaders. She also started her own organization. So it's a national organization called Tuesdays for Trash. And Tuesdays for Trash, it's a movement of getting people to pick up trash in their communities. You don't have to do it on Tuesday, but this is how her movement started. The other thing that I've implemented is resilience as resistance, mental health and climate activism. This is something that is only just now starting to be talked about. And I think the weight of our mental health and our sanity has only been exacerbated during the pandemic. No matter how strong of an individual you are, I know for myself, I have a sign above my desk called checking my battery. And I check my battery every day, because if I do not pour into myself or my battery is low, I can't pour into my partner. I can't pour into my 4-year-old. I can't pour into my staff, our student leaders, the movement, nothing. No one is going to get anything from me. And we heard directly from our student leaders during our policy camp last summer that this was something they wanted to talk about. There was the culmination of the climate crisis, political despair, a pandemic, and racial unrest. And they were tired. They were exhausted. This is something that they had not experienced. These young people are some of the most knowledgeable set of individuals I know. They are quite similar to the cohort of the young people and the generations who are part of the 60s civil rights movement. They want to advocate, they want to be out there, they want change to happen, but they are tired and they need to know, how do they build up their resilience? I don't really like to say eco-anxiety. And why is that? Because I feel like an article, it was, I think from Scientific American that came out a couple of weeks ago, really said it best in there, but like anxiety kind of holds us down and prevents us from continuously moving and progressing. So I like to use the word resilience. And so we had a program in December. It was our first one. And this is where we brought together 7 mental health providers and just our OC student leaders. So there were 35 in attendance. And what we did is we had an opening speaker, one of the providers who was also on the American Psychological Association's Climate Task Force. Just speaking of where we are, here are the numbers. You're not just feeling this, you're not alone. This is actually going on across the country, around the world. We then broke out into breakout room sessions. So each of our mental health providers had up to 5 in their room, so very small groups. We did not record the sessions, so it would be a safe space for our young people to share. And then we came back into a group reflection session in which another provider led. And he really talked about those key takeaways to be able to increase your resilience and maintain your resilience, where to look for community help or mental health providers. What are those forums that you can tap into? And as I was closing out the event, I asked immediately, would you like something like this again? In the chat box, it was nothing but yeses. And then when I debriefed with the mental health providers, they were like, yes, we want to be part of this. And so we are having another event May 19th. We want to make this bigger, so double in size. We are opening it up to the general public in that ages 15 to 24, so high school and college students, reaching out to our partners, reaching out to sponsors such as BetterHelp, Talkspace, Calm. Those are some of the apps you might have seen, and really trying to get people involved in climate activism. Is not just a 1 year or 6 month thing. This is something that's going to be going on and on, because climate change is an existential threat that increases each and every day. We're learning more about it every day. And so We are going to have to continue to build this resilience. I'm very proud of this program, not just because I came up with it, but because it's something that's needed. It's something where the young people are saying, I want this. This is impactful. Lastly, ways to get involved and support OC. First off, you can volunteer. We rolled out our new volunteer program earlier this year. We have 3 little programs: a social butterfly, an outreach officer, a donor diva. There's becoming a monthly sustainer. So this is where you pledge a certain amount each month. It could be $5, it could be $25, it could be $100, it could be $5,000, whatever someone desires in their heart. Monthly sustainers is a great way to support our climate, in that when you have monthly sustaining programs, then it helps the sustainability of the organization itself. One-time donations, they are great, they are awesome, but once that's done, it's done. You want to keep people engaged. So this is why we have our monthly sustainer program. Be a long-term volunteer. Our state organizers are very much in need of some state outreach volunteers. This is a person who is helping the state organizer with some of the back end stuff, doing those outreach with partners, coordinating with our student leaders. And this is again, a longer term volunteer position. So 6 months to a year that you're, designating your time. And those are just some of the simple ways that people can get involved and support. Of course, there's advertising on social media about us, sharing about us in your groups, talking about OC and climate justice at the dinner table. Only 40% of Americans have the conversation about climate change at the dinner table, and this has got to increase.
Wow. Wow. Jasmine, that's amazing.
Outstanding.
So many connection points with everything that we've talked about and would like to support. Tanya, I think I'm going to turn it over to you.
I don't know. No, I'm sorry. You left me speechless there. I mean, I can't, I was trying to think of something that you did not ask. I'll ask this one question. Can you talk about a moment when you were able to say it's handled? And Elizabeth, if you all don't know, what's her Scandal? She always said it's handled. And if they call you, her, when were you able to say it's handled?
Yeah, actually, I want to go back to my younger days in the lobbying firm to give this example. We were circulating a letter around Capitol Hill. So G and I mean, mainly we were on Capitol Hill 4 days out of 5 days of a week. And this was a letter that had to do with climate change, had the words carbon sequestration in it. We were visiting several different offices, Democrat, Republican, Independent. And there was this one Republican office, not to be named, and there was a staffer we were meeting with, and he was boasting about how his boss was best friends with, the sponsor of this letter, and he would love to sign on to it, but he had an issue with carbon sequestration. And it got very heated. G would tell you, even if she was here, that I led most of those meetings. She said I was the first intern that felt like wasn't an intern, just was like a person who was her partner at work. And I told him, let's just name him Bobby right now. I told Bobby that, let me work on something and circle back to you when I get back to the office this afternoon. So I called him that afternoon, and I had literally just taken out the word carbon sequestration, but I actually left the definition in there a couple paragraphs down, because we needed to make sure within that within that letter, that we were getting across the point of carbon sequestration, what was going on. and how this was affecting the agricultural industry. And when I told him that, he said, okay, no problem. I'll sign on to it. And she said this at my celebration. She was like, Jasmine just always handled it. You know, there was never a question. If there was an issue, I would take care of it. It wasn't, we're going to manage it. We're going to get it done. And I just carry forth this attitude even with my staff. I'm very analytical. And so I want to know everything. If there's an issue, don't wait till it's like way down one path. I want to make sure, bring it to me and let's talk it out. This is why we created OC think tank sessions, where we come together as a staff, sometimes staff and board, to talk about there might be an issue with some programming, there might be new programming we want to do, and we leave those think tank sessions with, it's handled.
Michelle, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I was curious about your funding model. Is it primarily individual donations, or are there an array of ways you get funded?
Yeah, we are majority funded by family foundations. We are currently trying to build up our grassroots fundraising. That's one of our goals for this year. And grassroots would be individual funding $5,000 and down. So doing creative fundraisers for that. Family foundations that fund us: Satterberg, Blaustein, Meyer Memorial Trust, Bill and Julie Young Fund. Those are the top ones that I would list right now. We are in discussions with several others and hopefully bringing in some rather large and amazing grants here in the next few months. I have heavily been advocating since I came on for general operating support. If you don't already know, this is kind of the gap of knowledge with philanthropy and those of us in social justice. The philanthropy world will give you money, but it'll be for a certain program. And we need general operating support that helps sustain us. And cutting out all of these restrictions. I mean, some of these, to apply for a grant, it'll be like 20 pages long. And do we have time to actually do that? We make the time, but do we have time, or could we be spending that time getting the work done? Also reports and such. So these are the conversations that are starting to go on. Peggy Shepard from We Act actually wrote a wonderful article about this a couple of weeks ago, and how philanthropy needs to step up in this regard and give more general operating support, cut out those restrictions. I mean, think of the impact that we would have if people just gave the money. And one of the directors of philanthropy that I'm very good friends with from one of the foundations, this is what she's advocating for, and turning, I guess I can share this. So Satterberg Foundation has traditionally funded just our Washington state work. And now they have pledged over $5 million for climate justice organizations. And so we have been in talks of general operating support. This is what she wants to do. She wants to give general operating support, don't have those restrictions, have people be able to do what they need to do, and give large multi-year grants. That is sustainability. That's where I know all my staff can be paid. I can give them raises. We can pay our fellows, all of them. We can pay all of our interns and do the amazing work. Individuals, we also, I should have mentioned this, in addition to monthly sustainers, we also have a program called the Founders Circle. These are where individuals make a larger pledge. So it's for a year. So they could do 500, 1,500, or 2,000. And so we have a group of approximately 10 people who are in the Founder Circle. That's just the name. It doesn't mean they were part of the founding. And those are our top major donors. It is very much a mix. I mean, my $500 people are young professionals working in the movement. And then you have people in the 2,000 ranges who are, people who are well into their careers, wanting to give back. And all of these individuals will also host since it's been virtual parlor parties. So inviting their friends and family for us to have a talk about OC and how you can get involved, what's going on in your current state or city, and what is the state of the world in regards to climate change.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think Darcy had a question next.
Oh, yes. So first of all, I love the Oregon connection. I won't speak for Anne, but I think she's probably nodding her head. So the first question is, you're currently in 6 states. How do you go about expanding to additional states?
Mhm.
And is that part of the future vision?
Yeah, so we're now currently in 5 states because we closed down the Nebraska program in
Right.
December. That was due to not being aligned with our updated policy principles, and there not being really a environmentally friendly landscape there. And so if I had it handy, I would share it with you guys. We created a map to guide us with expanding into new states. It is part of my 5-year vision that we are going to be in every region of the United States. States that we are currently in the exploratory phase are New Mexico, Texas, Louisiana, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. New Mexico, primarily because there are some big climate champions there. Pretty much most of the people who were elected in November are climate champions. They also have done and passed some climate legislation all throughout last year. So we know there that that's a great landscape. We also look into who are the current partners? Do we have people that we can align with, or would it just be us? We like to be part of coalitions. And so if there's not an existing coalition, then we want to know that before going in somewhere, because that's extra work on us. And so we need to make sure we have the capacity to do that extra work. It's also looking into young people, because that's what our movement is about. So from the colleges, the universities, the technical schools, the community colleges, is there a yearning for climate activism? Are there clubs that are active? Are there professors that you're seeing, writing articles about this? Texas, Louisiana, I mean, both Gulf Coast hurricanes heavily impacted frontline states, frontline communities. Texas, obviously, we saw with the grid. And there is movement in the Austin area of Texas. Not surprising, because Austin's very progressive. There's quite a few funders in the Dallas area. Not surprising for me. I know Dallas very well. And by funders, I mean individual funders. So some major donors, people who are not associated with the oil industry, but come from family money that are wanting to be part of the climate justice movement and give back. Louisiana, obviously that's home for me. It's the Gulf Coast, but we also note that Louisiana is hard. It's a red state, yet governor's blue, and go in between of establishing environmental justice law and not. And so that one is, it's a hard go between. There's some risk there. There's Cancer Alley that is there, which has huge uprising from the local community on climate activism. Pennsylvania, that's where you're getting into coal and factory country. And also it's a mix of elected officials, but it's also it's progressive in Philadelphia, but then you go outside of there. So it's a mix, but it's a great landscape, because you are hearing from a lot of the families who have worked in plants and whatnot for decades, that there needs to be a change. Their health is being affected and impacted. And then lastly, Wisconsin, the student activism there, I would say that was why it really stuck out. Also, they have a big coalition. The name is slipping me right now. So really it all goes back to this map we developed, because we wanted to be, again, I'm very analytical. So I wanted there to be strategy behind anything that we do. I don't want us to get stuck in a place where we're not able to tell funders, we're not able to tell new people who are part of our movement why we are somewhere. We need to be able to say that. We need to be able to say why we are staying somewhere. Are we making a change? Are we impacting law? How many elected officials do we have connections with? And if we're not making that done, then we need to make an exit and go somewhere else. And that's okay, but we just need to make sure that we're honest in those regards.
Thank you.
I have a question. I don't know if you noticed my
Yes.
raised hand, so I'll lower it. So this, Jasmine, as you've told this incredible story and with such confidence, so many nonprofits that I work with, they have a lot of talent. They want to do good things, but they struggle with choices like, how do we decide to be here, not there, you know, or we're about this, not that, when so much work needs to be done. So I'm wondering if you were to kind of pull it up and summarize it, what would you tell somebody? This is our operating model. This is how it works for us. How would you summarize it?
Great question. Love how you put me on the spot here. So OC is the catalyst for young people becoming visionaries, activists, and leaders in their own communities. We do this through a leadership development program and have found that by developing leadership skills in young people, this is only going to positively amplify the trajectory of their lives. It's only going to positively impact the climate justice movement. We get our young people in front of elected officials. The climate justice ecosystem is a huge system containing organizations that are adult allied organizations, young people organizations, and a few of mix. We are a young person's organization, and our niche is developing those leadership skills, getting them in front of those elected officials, meeting with them, and working on legislation together, not just the writing, the drafting, the passing, but it's advancing it. It's developing activists. Activism looks a variety of ways: social media campaigns, writing, talking at the dinner table, holding up signs in the streets. But our kids at OC are impacting a movement by passing and advancing policy on the state level and the national level.
Thank you. And just one follow-up question. I think it's obvious, but I want to check. And you connect with and work with young people primarily through a state-based approach as opposed to some other way of finding them and connecting with them?
Yes, it's through a state-based approach. We are expanding the national program this year. I'm bringing on a new policy and programs manager to help with that, because there's kids from all over the country want to be part of OC in a more formal capacity, but they're in a state that we don't have a state organizer. So we have identified that that is definitely a need. But up until now, yes, it has been state predominantly.
Jasmine, do you adjust your program based on the community? So say your leadership program, do you have different ways to address this topic based on the community that you're working with?
Yeah, great question. So we redesigned the fellowship program this past year, and I wanted it to be streamlined because each of the states, what our fellows were being taught was different. So there wasn't a streamlined course, you know, that advocacy, the storytelling, the coalition building, organizing, that wasn't necessarily received by student leaders in each state. So we streamlined that. What I tell people is that your experience, though, in each state program is going to be different because the local context of climate change in each state is different. What's going on in New York is not the same that's going on in Florida. And this is not just, you know, everyday communities, what are we experiencing in our communities, but it's also the elected officials are different. The amount of policy that's already been passed during the works is different. The types of colleges and student leaders who are involved is different. You know, some places it's very liberal, and then others we have like a bunch of state schools. So yes, it is the same in that our fellowship program curriculum is the same, but the context is different in each state.
I have a question, Jasmine. I love your passion and your experience and the work that you're doing on resilience in terms of how to tackle the psychological aspect of what young people are facing with climate justice. And so I'm wondering, you know, I think about, again, this intersectionality of like that there are these different groups that are doing different things that are kind of overlapping with each other. And one of them is Margaret Klein Solomon, who is now, you know, she's Harvard trained psychologist who is also passionate about the same thing in terms of how do you deal psychologically with young climate leaders. And she's now at the Climate Emergency Fund giving out money. And I would think that if you made this presentation that you just made to us to the Climate Emergency Fund, they would open up their vault for you. It's just such a natural in terms of asking for general support from them. And the same thing with the Hive Fund for Climate and Gender Justice. You are such a highly respected climate organization. And I'm just, wondering how I can help in terms of bridging for you.
How you can help bridge away, Roberta.
So Jasmine, we really appreciate your time, and we have learned so much from you today. Thank you for that excellent presentation. And we just have one more question, and it's from Kennedy, and then we're going to close out.
Okay.
I think Michelle had a question.
I was going to say the same
Oh,
thing. I saw Michelle, she raised her hand.
oh, I'm sorry, Michelle.
Um,
It's
well,
more of a comment. Roberta and I serve on One Earth, the board of directors of One Earth, and we're getting ready to move into a phase where the governance committee is going to be inviting feature speakers as a part of our board meeting. I think you would, for multiple reasons. One huge reason being to inform, but also, to get we have a bias towards youth and women, climate action, urgent climate action initiatives. So I think it would be a win-win-win for you to give that presentation. And the people that are on our board also, are from Earth to Justice, they're from Patagonia, they're from, a variety of other places. So for the visibility as well. And so it's another bridge, and I will definitely pursue that.
I would welcome that. Thank you, Michelle.
My pleasure.
okay. And for me, Jasmine, wonderful presentation. I really appreciated it. And I really just loved your insight and your perspective. And there were a lot of things that I didn't know going into this. So I'm walking out with a lot of notes, feeling like Michelle said, like very informed. And then my question for you, I know you did talk on a few things that are really important right now, but if you were to kind of narrow down your top 3 calls to action for people who may view this presentation, what would you say in terms of climate justice would be your top 3?
Yeah, calls to action. I'm huge on education. Educate yourself. Google climate change in the morning. Save the climate change news on your tab. Secondly, I would say get involved with a local environmental justice organization in your area. But there's also virtual opportunities. And then third, I would say have the conversation at the dinner table, at happy hour, with your friends, with your family. Break down those different impacts, and you can make it fun. You could say, let's talk this week about the food insecurity impacts of climate change. Let's talk about those here in Oregon, or here in Montreal, or here in Detroit. And you make it fun. You could create a little trivia with it, but people are learning, people are engaged. And then when people are engaged that way, they want to talk about it with another person.
I love that. Thank you.
I have one thing to add that I think we talked about once, Jasmine, and that was adding something to your email signature. I got that idea from somebody else and just put it on my email signature. Please consider the climate in your shopping, eating, voting, and investing. Just again, as a conversation thing, sometimes people ask me about it.
Mm-hmm.
Jasmine, it's been such a pleasure to meet you and to hear your story. It's very impactful, and I'm almost speechless, and I'm never almost speechless. So this is really profound, what you've accomplished, what you are doing and how you are doing it. I think for us, in terms of the Magnolias, if your generosity this morning was overwhelming in terms of your time. It's deeply appreciated, but we would like to continue this dialogue with you, because in terms of our orientation, we are developing our strategies on how to help. It's important for us to listen to you and others so that we can develop our navigational tools so we can meet you where your needs are most appropriate. And that's where an ongoing dialogue with us would help us to develop a strategy for where we can plug in and be most useful.
Thank you, Jackie. Well, you all have my email. Let me know when you want to speak again. I'm open to that.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Jasmine.
Really wonderful. Thank you. And I have lots of ideas of who to connect you to in some of the new states that you're looking at, if that's helpful.
Yes, yes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jasmine.
Thank you, Jasmine.
And
Thank you.
Roberta and Tanya for the introduction to Jasmine. I have hope.
Good. That's what we need. We need hope.
Sure do.
Thank you, ladies, so much. It's been a pleasure meeting each and every one of you. I love that y'all's name is Magnolia. I forgot to say at the end, I think that's the state flower of Louisiana. So I think you guys have a great group of women here, and coming together from all over to try and make a difference. That's very, very meaningful. So I would love to continue the dialogue with y'all, and you know, let me know in what ways I can be helpful, and any ways that you would like to help out OC in our movement.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Hallelujah.
Thank you.
This is one
Have a
of
great
the-
vacation.
You hang up first.
Yes.
You hang up first. No, you hang up first.
For vacation, I wish we could join you in a suitcase.
Oh, maybe one day, Tanya, maybe.
Maybe one day. Bye-bye.
Have a wonderful
All right, ladies, bye-bye.
What happens when a woman takes power? What happens when she won't back down? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens? What happens? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens when she won't back down? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens? What happens? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens when she won't back down? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens when she wears the crown?